Joining us now is Andrew Thompson. He is a freelance writer, and his latest piece published in The Verge is called Engineers of Addiction. It's subheaded Slot Machines Perfected Addictive Gaming. Now Tech Wants Their Tricks. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, listen, you went to Las Vegas, and you wrote a piece about the science of addicting people to slot machines. So let's start there. I love this piece. I think it's a terrific piece of writing, terrific piece of, you bet, terrific piece of analysis. So tell us just in a few words, basically what you did and what you found.
Well, this is not the first piece I've reported about slot machines. I live in Philadelphia, and we started getting casinos back in the late aughts. First, there were two planned. We got Sugar House Casino on the Delaware River, and ultimately we'll be getting our second and last casino. I think in 2015. In deep South Philly, next to all the stadiums. And so just as a city reporter here, I had sort of looked into kind of the regulatory framework of casinos locally, and a colleague of mine, RJ Thompson, had written a piece in City Paper about the science of slot machines. And it had a couple of these ideas, and had some ideas I didn't have as well, the sort of illusion of the near miss that slot makers engineer into their machines, just sort of overall the way they're designed to addict. And he quoted Natasha Schull, who is an MIT professor, who wrote the book Addiction by Design, which is where I cull a lot of these ideas from. And so the idea was that when Atlantic City started to go under, it wasn't really that people were playing table games elsewhere. It was really these slots parlors that were opening up that was siphoning off business from what used to be the second largest gambling hub in the country. And so it started out as this way to just explore Atlantic City. That angle was docked from the piece, but it did sort of create another reason to sort of look at why slots are the way they are, and how exactly they came to be as addicting as they are, and sort of how that's being pursued by people over in Silicon Valley.
Well, it's and I want to get to that in a second. The Silicon Valley angle is really interesting. In fact, we've tried to book Natasha Schull. By the way, she is interesting. And her work is fascinating. So you go through the history of slot machines and all that. You go out to Las Vegas and you meet with these guys. And basically, you mentioned one of the fundamental principles just now that they use, which is the idea of giving people the sense that they've had a near miss. And many of us have noticed, and the professor you mentioned has written about, they make the physical environment hard to get around and hard to get out. You get lost easily, which exposes you to more machines and all of that. You also mentioned that Caesars, for example, has stored so much customer data that some people have valued it at $1 billion. What are a couple of the other principles they use to get people addicted to, or to get people to game or play the machines addictively?
Yeah, well, there's a couple. I mean, you have to understand that the ways that what the computers allowed slot machines to do, or rather, let me start by saying this. Effectively, the principle on which a slot machine works is the Skinner box. So it's variable reward schedules. It's you push the lever, you get a food pellet randomly, so you don't know how often you're going to get the food pellet. And there's a couple psychological principles that this exploits. One of them is tension about the anticipation of, are you going to get something or are you not, that when we find release from that tension, we crave whatever gave us the release. And the other thing is just novelty. We're just hungry for novelty. And so what the computer has allowed the machines to do is program just sort of the right amount of tension. And I don't want to be too simplistic about that, because everyone, every individual player has their own propensity for risk and reward. And so something that gives a lot of feedback isn't going to necessarily to appeal to the person who likes a real high volatility game. And the game manufacturers use this term volatility to describe.
Now, just out of curiosity, Andrew, just to jump in for a second, since different people have a different pace with this, do the machines actually track that?
Yeah, so the machines do have, the machines know everything about you in a casino. There's nothing they don't track, in a sense. So they do know when you go into, if you were to go into a Harrah's or you were to go into Sugar House here in Philadelphia, you would have a player rewards card. It's called different things in different casinos, and you put that in the machine, and you earn points the more you play. And the more you play, the more points you get. You can get free food. In the article I mentioned one guy who's played slot machines so much that the casino gave him 4 cruises. And in exchange for that, it's sort of the exchange we make on computers all the time now. You give them information about you. And one of the pieces of information they have about you is what kinds of games you want, what volatility level you prefer, and sort of what your pain point is when you stop playing after you've lost a certain amount of money. So, yeah, anything you think they might know about you, a casino does know about you.
And it's fascinating. We're talking with writer Andrew Thompson about his piece in The Verge, Engineers of Addiction. You also mentioned that they're very anxious to get you into the zone. You mentioned the psychologist. Hungarian names are tough to pronounce, but I've been to Hungary. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I think. Who, although it has many more vowels.
I've only heard the name pronounced once, I think, and I forget what it was, and it's embarrassing that I don't know, but we are on the same page.
Right. It's about 25, the spoken version is about 25% the length of the written version. But he describes, he wrote a book called Flow, talking about how you get into a certain state where time slows down and you're almost euphoric, and the as you say, the zone is hyper-focused, neurotransmitters, a buzz, but directed towards a numbness with no goal in particular. And so you're saying they're engineering people into that state, which is an addictive state, right?
Yes, and there are different ways other than flow to look at that state. And I remember I spoke with Shul, and in her book, there are plenty of other explanations, right? There are religious trance states. There are, there's others, but flow is one kind of pillar you can use to understand the zone. And flow is this state of just hyper-focused awareness. It's something where it's the word flow is literally used to describe what happens when people sort of flow from one action effortlessly to the next, and they do it without any conscious thought. The thing is that you can use flow to describe the process of writing. You can use it to describe manufacturing. You can use it to describe all sorts of sort of productive things that people do. In fact, it's kind of become this new buzzword out of Silicon Valley, because a writer named Steve Kotler wrote a book called Rise of Superman, and it was about these flow states that people get into, and he created something called the Flow Genome Project, and it was about how to induce flow. The thing is that flow is geared towards some sort of positive goal, and we can, debate the merits of terms like positive and negative, but it's not escapist. The zone is escapist. The zone seeks to kind of insulate people from the outside world, and it is more of a kind of drug-like pursuit.
So the zone and flow are not the flow. It seems that I read that book actually, and he was basically saying that's when you're kind of perfectly matched with the task you're
Yeah,
performing, and
right.
you get reward out of it, and it comes easily, like a musician improvising perfectly or whatever. And the zone, as you say, it's more druggy. It's kind of like the dark side of flow.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the dark side of flow. It's the sort of inversion of flow. It's what you do when, you are kind of automatically and mindlessly trying to sort of get out of some sort of it's a very hard concept to describe, which is why I'm kind of stumbling on my words right now. I will say that the players I talked to in the book are very, very similar to players that many other reporters have talked to, including Shul, who's not a reporter, but she did some kind of reporting work for her book. In archival articles I read at the Las Vegas Library, kind of everywhere. And the players I spoke to were people who, as we talked with them, or as I talked with them, it became more and more apparent sort of why they were there. And both of them ultimately revealed that they had lost someone they loved. And the woman was saying that, she had spent, she had spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in these slot machines. She had said she started playing when her husband had cancer and was in the cancer ward, and she came there to escape. And the man next to her said, that's funny. I had a son. I think that's also like why I played, because he died this brutal, prolonged death. And they're both there playing these slot machines, talking about these dead people. And that is something you see in the archival articles everywhere, all the time.
And what's interesting about that, we're talking with writer Andrew Thompson about the engineers of addiction in Las Vegas. What's interesting about that is when you go into these physical spaces, which, by the way, I kind of recoil when I go in, but it's very clear you've exited your own life. You're now in another space just by walking in. And then the machines take you even further. The analogy with drugs or alcohol abuse is impossible for me to avoid. And, it's interesting because when the engineers of addiction do their work, of course, they don't think about what might be the negative after effects of people spending all their money. Just like the people who do the Dos Equis ads don't imagine the most interesting man in the world after he's been on a 3-day bender. He's not so interesting anymore. But it seems to me that that's where the kind of dark side piece of this comes in, and the really scary. I mean, it's scary enough. We've always known that gambling, some people get really carried away with gambling, and it can be a problem. And you describe how there are machines in the airports, and I can tell you that people I would never have expected. I have walked through those airports on the way out and seen their eyes just light up when they see just one more machine before they get on the plane. The really scary part of this, which you get to at the end of your piece, is how people who make apps that go everywhere are looking at this kind of technology of addiction now.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah. One of the things that was difficult to discern was how much this technology has been deliberately adopted by people in Silicon Valley, and how much of it is just that this is kind of where this is sort of the natural state. This is a natural staging capital, and these technologies will pop up individually regardless of where you are. There are some people who, after Shul wrote her book, and she did write the most thorough dissection of the slot machine I think that's ever really been published, at least that isn't some sort of trade publication, and its effects. And she was approached by lots of people out in Palo Alto and San Jose and around there. And they were asking her, how do you do it? Like, how do we do this? How do we solve this attention retention program or problem that we've been having?
Yeah, which is so interesting, by the way, because most of us think we're already addicted to surfing the net. I did a commentary about a new survey that AT&T did about what people do when they drive, and they're on their smartphones and they're taking selfies and they're surfing the net and they're tweeting and most people think it's already bad enough, but apparently the people who contacted her feel we haven't quite got this thing addictive enough yet, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, again, she told me, a couple people that had contacted her. I don't know how many other people have read her works, trying to figure out how to apply those principles to what they do. And I also, again, I'm not sure it matters. I'm not sure that, and I think this was something that didn't really come out in the article the way I wanted it to, was that, again, it's not just a matter of how many people are directly trying to copy slot machines. It's just this type of technology, this Skinner box, has a natural success to it. It's just, that was Skinner's triumph, was showing that actually you just tweak these little reward schedules. It's really, really simple, and you have an addict. And it's not that simple. I mean, there is a whole. When I was in Las Vegas, the slot makers telling me that slot machines are an art and a science. I would debate some of that, but there is something artful, right, in the sense that there is an inexact science. There's just the science we haven't really nailed down. And I think that, the Skinner box was invented long before slot machines look the way they do now. So I think that, Skinner boxes are what have been showing up, in tech, regardless of the way slot machines work.
And I guess I would also kind of conclude by saying whether or not they've looked at the specific science that Bally or other gaming companies use in apps and other digital tech, there's going to be a kind of Darwinist thing going on where as they tap into these successful addictive techniques, those are the apps that are going to succeed, Angry Birds or whatever. We may not know the extent to which it's deliberate collaboration and borrowing and the extent to which it's just discovering the same principles. But either way, there's a kind of capitalism of addiction and a technology of addiction at work. Right? Is that a fair conclusion to kind of wrap up our conversation?
I think so. I mean, so I would wrap it up with you saying, yes, that's true. And I want to really reiterate kind of what the main point of the piece was. I think, it's hard to boil it down to a main point. But the thing
in 30 seconds, what was the main point? Because we're going to have to go to a break.
I would just tell people to read the piece and look up the concept ludocapitalism by Julian DeBell, which I think is what the whole idea of the slotification of tech and everything is. So that would be my one recommendation.
The slotification of tech and the gamification of society, right? So,
yes.
Okay, great. Terrific writing. Thanks for coming on the show, Andrew Thompson.
Thank you so much.
We will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.